This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, we hear the craziest celebrity rant of 2024. Yes, the year is new, but this one certainly qualifies. But also, why it could divide the country even more than we are already divided. And we get the free speech skinny from Greg Lukianoff. He's the co-author of an amazing new book, The Canceling of the American Mind. Strap in, folks. The First Amendment is under sizable attack.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
Before we get things started, I'd love it if you subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. We've got new episodes every Wednesday, plus more and more bonus episodes coming in hot. Whoopi Goldberg must be stopped. Now, okay, I'm a free speech guy. I don't want her stopped. She can say what she wants to say, but how about some accountability? Maybe an adult in the room tapping her on the shoulder and saying, hey, Whoopi, those are some incendiary, insane comments. Do you really want to say them? Is that really what you want to share with the audience? I mean, she's a professional broadcaster on a major network, ABC. And of course, she's on The View. And she's spreading these insane conspiracy theories that are making us even more divided. If you think I'm exaggerating, here's Whoopi on The View saying what's going to happen if Donald Trump gets a second term in office.
But I'm here to say it's ours to lose. It is this country. This is what it's all about. Either you want it to work forward thinking, you want everybody to have the ability to say how they feel, what they want to move forward, or you don't. Or you want somebody who says, I'm going to be on day one, I'm going to be a dictator. Who says it to you, tells you, I'm going to put you people away. I'm going to take all the journalists, I'm going to take all the gay folks, I'm going to move you all around and disappear you. If that's the country you want, you know who to vote for. If that's not the country you want, you have to make a decision.
But that's what MAGA wants. That's what's going on.
That's real. That's real audio. That happened. It was broadcast on ABC. It's a network with a news division. It's real. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's real, but it is real. And it's absolute fear-mongering. Now, compare this to what happened with Aaron Rodgers recently. The Jets quarterback suggested, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that Jimmy Kimmel doesn't want those Epstein files to be released. Insinuation, obviously, is that the far-left host might be mentioned in them. Maybe he's a pedophile. Maybe he's pedophile adjacent. It was dumb, irresponsible, stupid, and, of course, more importantly, fact-free. Aaron Rodgers had nothing on Jimmy Kimmel. He was just making stuff up. And you know what? The media pounded Rodgers again and again and again. I would say overzealously so because it was just a dumb quip. But, you know, reporters were right and Rodgers was wrong. And really, that's what the media should be doing. Even if they're overzealous, they should be holding people accountable when they say crazy things like that. Doesn't mean Rodgers goes to jail. Doesn't mean Whoopi Goldberg goes to jail. It means that they should be held accountable in some fashion, saying, hey, this was wrong. Do you really want to say that? Why did you say that? Do you have any facts to back it up? That's a good, constructive dialogue. And yet when Whoopi Goldberg says the crazy things that she says, and she does it all the time on The View, it's almost like a daily thing, no one blinks an eye. There's no outrage. There's no coverage. There's no media reporters coming to her side saying, how dare you? You can't say that. You have no facts to back it up. Tut, tut. Anything. Nothing. You can't be outraged by Rodgers and then hear what Whoopi says and go, oh, that's just Whoopi. She's just going off the rails again. That's where we are in our society, folks. We've got two tiers. You've got a quarterback who's not a news anchor, saying something dumb and being held responsible for it. That's perfectly fine, but he is a quarterback. He's not exactly a news anchor. He's not a reporter. He's not someone giving out information. And you got Whoopi Goldberg, who is on a news-related talk show saying the most incendiary things possible without any sort of comeback, without any sort of accountability. And if you think that's bad in early 2024, which is exactly where we are now, it's going to get much worse. Trust me. I thought I cared about free speech. I do care about free speech, but I am nothing compared to Greg Lukianoff. Greg's the president and CEO of FIRE. That's the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. That group rallies to the side of anybody who's been unfairly canceled. Why? Well, they flex their free speech rights. They said something. And then FIRE comes along and they lawyer up on their behalf. They defend students and teachers and everyday Americans. FIRE has their back. Has your back, too. So does Greg. He really is a fascinating guy. And his latest book is co-written by a really smart woman. She's a rising star in journalism. Her name is Ricky Schlott. And this book is exactly what we need right now. And I wish we didn't need it, but we do. The book is called The Canceling of the American Mind. And it is scary. It's heartbreaking. It's sometimes life-affirming, too. It's really just an absolute withering look at what cancel culture is doing to our society. It's crushing the American experiment in almost every part of our world. I just can't think where it doesn't sneak into. I mean, Hollywood, the media, academia, you name it, cancel culture's there, making things much worse. Now, I had heard of some of the cases that are brought up in the book, but a lot more I had no idea about. And even the ones I did know about, I didn't know all the details, all the background, all the context. I'm not easily shocked. This is scary stuff, legitimately scary stuff. But I think it's important that The Canceling of the American Mind also has some good tips on how we can start fighting back. We don't have to take it. And you know what? Once free speech is gone, it's not coming back for a while, maybe a long while. We've got to do something. That's where Greg comes in. I was so happy that Greg shared some of his time with me because I'm sure he's busy. Gosh, all the free speech fights going on right now. FIRE is on fire. Greg is busy, but we've got him here. He's having a great conversation on this topic. I hope you enjoy my chat with a true free speech warrior, Greg Lukianoff. Greg, thanks for joining the show. I've been looking forward to this conversation. You're such an important figure in the culture right now. And one of the things I didn't know about you is the book opens with an anecdote about cognitive behavioral therapy and how you applied some of those principles to the work you've been doing over the years. And I just thought it was such an interesting nugget. I want you to see, maybe you can tease that a little bit, then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the story in the book.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I got suicidally depressed in 2007, partially because of the culture war. I became FIRE's first legal director back in 2001, and I'd been defending, free speech on campus for years. But I'd only become president of FIRE in 2006, and that was an exhausting process. And I was I was in bad shape by 2007. I was hospitalized, the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
My employees didn't even know, by the way. I sneaked out to get hospitalized, and made up some excuses for being away for a bit, all that kind of stuff. But while I was recovering, I studied cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive behavioral therapy is a process by which you teach your mind to look at some of the more exaggerated things we say to ourselves, and apply reason to them, not positive thinking. Just actually go, I'm going to die alone. The state didn't go well. Oh, she totally hates me after that. I'm doomed. All of these kind of exaggerated thoughts that everybody has, but anxious and depressed people have more. The wisdom of CBT was that it turned out that if you actually got in the habit of talking back to some of the exaggerated voices, you can actually decrease your anxiety and depression. And these different exaggerations have names. They're catastrophizing, overgeneralizing, mind reading, assuming what someone else is thinking, binary thinking, that everything is either great or terrible, for example. And as I was learning to address this kind of depressive and anxious way of thinking in myself, I started looking on campus and was like, it almost seems like the adults are teaching people to overgeneralize or to catastrophize or to engage in moralistic blaming, all of these other cognitive distortions that I was familiar with. But the good news was the students weren't buying it. They were rolling their eyes at the adults like they always had. But around 2013, 2014, we started noticing, and it wasn't subtle, that students were showing up on campus overgeneralizing, engaging in catastrophizing, binary thinking, and therefore were demanding more speech codes, were demanding more protection, were demanding trigger warnings and safe spaces and all these kind of things. And I noticed that really early on, and that's what led to my writing "Coddling the American Mind," the article back with Jonathan Haidt, which we started in 2014, to make the argument that all of these mental habits are a disaster for free speech and academic freedom in the long run on campus. They're also a disaster for mental health of young people. And unfortunately, both of those predictions have come true.
Yeah. By the way, I mentioned that for two reasons. One, I just thought it was an interesting way to enter the conversation, and I wanted to get you to expound on it, which you obviously did. But also, I have something similar in my family about mental health struggles. And I always think it's positive when we talk about it, when we don't hide it. And I really appreciate you just
Agreed.
being more open about it and having, when it touches you personally, it takes on a new perspective. And so thank you for sharing that. And I just think that's a great way to kind of explore what's happening right now. You know, one of the things that I appreciate about the book is that there's a rich history of what's going on in the culture. This didn't happen yesterday. And it goes back to the 90s. And one of the things you mentioned briefly, which I was so curious about, was the movie PCU. I think it was 94 it came out. And I thought, you know, it wasn't a great movie. It didn't do very well at the box office. And I wanted to maybe get your thoughts on, I guess, the why of both, because it felt like to me it wasn't a cultural touchstone yet. It was happening, but we didn't have the, it wasn't grabbing the zeitgeist like it might today. Share some thoughts on that movie.
So we refer to PCU, which was Jeremy Piven was the star of it. David Slade was the villain. But a young Jon Favreau was kind of the big stoner character. And who knew he would single-handedly, you know, save the Star Wars universe, create the Marvel universe? Like, him being such a big deal is something that still kind of impresses me to this day.
That's right.
And like you said, it's not a great movie, but we use it as an example of a moment that was reflective of what was already happening. Is that political correctness had become a joke by the mid 1990s. Generation X, you know, my generation always thought PC was kind of BS. And what happened in the first great age of political correctness, which we talk about in the book, which is, and this is an amazing sort of chronology to follow. 1964, the beginning of the free speech movement in Berkeley. 1965, Herbert Marcuse advocates a society of enlightened censorship against right-wingers and conservatives in a book called Repressive Tolerance. And he was, you know, a big guru of the left. But by the time I was going to school, he wasn't taken all that seriously. Mm-hmm. That being said, his ideology already had a foothold. So from 1985 to 1995, roughly, this is when campuses went from being, you know, bastions of free speech, at least in their own eyes, to being places passing speech codes and policing speech. But by 1995, the student population kind of fell out of love with the idea of enlightened censorship. The faculty had kind of fallen out of love with the idea of enlightened censorship. But what everyone missed is that the administrators kept right on chugging. So there was this moment when basically suddenly all the speech codes were defeated in court, including at my alma mater, Stanford Law School, in 1995 being kind of the last one. And then PC became a joke, and it wasn't just PCU that was making fun of it. It was being making fun. It was being made fun of by liberals and conservatives, and in between alike. It was an embarrassing, misstep in the culture.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, everybody seemed to go, "Whew, thank goodness that's over. I guess we're fine now. Nothing to fix on campus." And of course, I started at FIRE in 2001. And already by that point, it was surprisingly easy to get in trouble for what you said on campus, whether it was faculty or students. And this was all by administrators, even though students themselves were quite good on free speech. And I point this out, one, to give a sense of history and how far back this goes. It goes back to the 60s, actually, or even before. But the first grade age of political correctness, we made a huge mistake that essentially, since things could not maintain that level of speech policing anyway, it was eventually going to fizzle out. But then we thought, oh, great, it's over. There's nothing more we have to do other than a couple of lawsuits, nothing to fix. It's me urging everyone that even though people think that maybe wokeism or whatever you want to call it is not as intense as it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and that campuses are rightfully being held up to a lot of scrutiny at the moment, that this means we've done our part. We're done. We can move on. No, we cannot. In the first great age of political correctness, we thought everything was fine and it was just a phase. And then everything metastasized. For the first 12 years of my career, it was all about campuses finding new justifications for speech codes that exist to this day, usually called bias-related incident programs. And now we've been in a really bad spot as we illustrate in Canceling the American Mind, a genuine crisis on campus for at least since 2017, with its early beginnings in 2014. And as people are growing more skeptical of the campus environment, we can't just, say, now they're laughing stocks. Let's move on to the next thing, because we got to make some structural changes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's so interesting that the administrators were the driving force, and now it often seems like it's the students who are leading the charge, and the administrators are running scared. You started firing.
That's actually a little bit of an illusion, though.
Okay.
What really happened in 2014 was that an administrative class, and this is not all administrators, to be clear, but it's oftentimes, frankly, DEI administrators, for example, who kind of see themselves as the defenders of political orthodoxy on campus. They got to meet a student generation that was less pro-free speech, and together it led to the disaster of cancel culture on campus that we've seen,
Gotcha.
Kind of beginning in 2014, but really accelerating in 2017.
When you first started FIRE, I understand from the book that there were liberals, there were conservatives, it might even be Marxists in that mix. What was the purpose behind that collection of ideologies? And does FIRE still maintain that kind of diversity behind the scenes? I don't know if you quiz everyone when they walk in the door, but I was just kind of curious about the makeup of that, because I find that heartening.
Well, just to be clear, I didn't found FIRE. It was founded by Harvey Silverglate, my mentor, who's a left-leaning libertarian, and Alan Charles Kors, who is one of the great scholars of the Enlightenment and one of the world's biggest experts on Voltaire, and who's a more right-leaning libertarian. But I joined about a year and a half into it as the first legal director, and then became president. But yeah, us being a group that had people who actually voted for different candidates, different main party candidates, was something that was part of the vision of the organization from the very beginning. And I say main party because when I worked at the ACLU, there were people who either voted Democrat or Green, basically as long as it was far left. But there were no libertarians, there were no conservatives at the ACLU of Northern California. And we knew that was one of the things that actually was a disadvantage for the ACLU, is that you need actual political difference if you want to defend free speech, because the person on the other side of the political fence from you will point out your blind spots. They'll point out what you're not getting about the case. And what's amazing is, since this was so much part of our DNA, time and time again, you'd actually see conservatives arguing for why we should take a case that was profoundly offensive to conservatives. It wasn't just that situation you could imagine where, the liberal would argue why you shouldn't, come after, something that reflected liberal ideas of why you should censor. It would actually reverse that. Essentially, sometimes the most adamant to go after, to protect the speech were the ones who you would assume would have been the most offended by it. It's a beautiful thing. And yeah, FIRE absolutely maintains that to this day. We have, we have a big organization. I was the 5th employee at the time, and now we have about 125. And yeah, it's a very politically diverse place. The happy hours are fun. We like to argue with each other.
I can imagine.
And it's great.
In recent, maybe the last year or so, I've been covering different examples where films were introduced, meant to be screened at colleges, and of course it doesn't happen. They're canceled. They're shouted down. And what's been really frustrating for me is that I'm often the only reporter even covering it, or maybe one of 2 or 3. Free Beacon's not there. Breitbart's not there. Sort of the usual right-leaning suspects. Not even the Daily Wire. Even when one of their own personalities, her film, got shut down. Why do you think this part of the free speech fight isn't getting much coverage? I mean, it makes me sad that Hollywood won't even lift a finger or raise a voice about it. But is this something that Fire covers, or could there be other organizations that would step in these situations? Because it drives me crazy.
Oh, we do cover.
Okay.
We count that together with deplatforming, and we do actually intervene when screenings are shut down, for example. The reason why you probably haven't heard as much about that, though, is because they're comparatively not considered quite as shocking. Like when someone decides not that they, when it turns out someone can't screen a film, people aren't, understandably, aren't quite as outraged as when like someone loses a job over speech. So basically, it's in a giant flood of existing cases, frankly, unlike we have seen anytime, in our first 15 years. So it does tend to get drowned out. When it comes to, Breitbart or some of the conservative media not covering it as much, I think at least in part that's because there are more outrageous examples all the time. But here's something that your listeners should probably know. When we talk about this in Canceling the American Mind, we produce a lot of data on how bad it's gotten, and
a lot of data,
a lot of data on how bad it is, and we can't find a period outside of the 1930s, not 50s, in which this scale of professors being fired, is anywhere even close. So it's it is a really bad moment. But yes, the number of professors losing their job has decreased over the past couple of years. Now, that's natural because, eventually, as I liken to the Salem witch trials, you eventually run out of witches, to burn or to hang.
And they self-censor too, as well, I would think.
And people self-censor. But also, we've noticed this same trend, is that one year the threat is primarily students getting in trouble, then another year it's the professors getting in trouble, and then you have the shout downs. You have things directed at speakers. So, a bunch of students get in trouble one year, then a bunch of professors get in trouble, and those two are taken care of for a while. They're going to watch their mouths for at least a couple more years, and then the next year it's shout downs. And this 2023 and a little bit of 2022 were the year of campus shout downs.
Gosh.
You saw this directed at Charlie Kirk. You saw this directed at Riley Gaines. You saw this directed at Judge Kyle Duncan at Stanford Law School. Again, my alma mater, was very ashamed of that. At Yale Law School, for that matter. So we saw a big uptick in shout downs in the past year.
Gotcha. I wasn't going to ask this, but this just came to mind. When you think about the students who are shouting down X, Y, or Z, and the passion they have, and the fact that if you look in their eyes, you would think they're almost programmed to be a certain way, and then maybe that's stereotypical, but it feels that way when you hear them and see them. Are they reachable? I mean, can we convince them? I guess the red pill is the cutesy term for this, but I'd like to live in a world where in 2 years that person would regret those actions, would realize that it's not the right way to approach this conversation. Do you see any even anecdotal evidence that maybe some students do wake up or shake off that kind of thinking?
Well, probably because I've heard it enough. I know that at least some students do, that they're like, that was probably wrong. And sometimes it takes their own speech being threatened. And sometimes, very much to their credit, it doesn't take that at all. It just takes getting a little bit older and being like, maybe that wasn't right. Maybe that wasn't the right call. And we can point a lot of fingers at the students. But really, the thing that we emphasize in both coddling and canceling of the American mind is how much these are habits that are taught by adults.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And particularly administrators, again, because like when you look at the Stanford shout down, there was a DEI administrators who met with the students for hours and hours, before the actual shout down. That's a case where first students and administrators, had a little push for, or at least students initially had a push for getting him disinvited, and the campus stood by the invitation. But then when they're actually invited to campus, there was, the students met for hours with the DEI administrators, and it went, it seemed to follow a script. It was essentially, there was a shout down for the first 10 minutes of him speaking. At exactly 10 minutes, a DEI administrator gets up with a prepared speech that she has to unfold, and then later claimed it was impromptu, which is just like, no, we saw your speech. Like, about how is the juice of whatever worth the squeeze of free speech, or she uses this colloquial term, like, is the juice worth the squeeze? And there she's like, is free speech really worth it? Is having you here, Fifth Circuit judge, actually worth it? And of course the answer is Fifth Circuit circuit judges are one level below the Supreme Court. Is it worth it to have them at a law school to speak? Of course it is. That's an asinine thing to actually say.
Yeah, that case
so
is
in a
amazing.
lot of cases, it's an amazing case. And a lot of cases they're being taught bad lessons. But then again, it is law school. So you are dealing with some actual, people who have been out in the real world for a while and still come in believing that the most noble thing they can do is exercise the popular will of Stanford Law School as a student body as a whole, which leans quite to the left, and to kick off the interloper. And I stress this because what drives me nuts about some of these cases is that the students seem to think they're acting like rebels, but they're actually enforcing a very popular position at these schools. Yeah. I mean, San Francisco State University, when they actually flat out assaulted Riley Gaines, or at least that's what's alleged, but they certainly shouted her down. The university came out and said nice things about the protesters, and they were proud of them. Yes. And it's kind of like, no, but you're just defending with illiberal means. You're defending the popular opinion at your school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some rebels. You were a producer on the documentary "Can We Take a Joke?" and that was 2015. It seems like a million years ago. I've been cheering the fact that comedians have been taking tougher stances, have been going to alternative media platforms to tell their jokes. How do you see the comedy field as far as progress or even regression when it comes to free speech since then?
When it comes to the chapters we wrote, so the process of writing Canceling the American Mind with Ricky got me pretty depressed again, not like it was in 2007. But putting all the evidence together really got me down, because it's like, even though I've been working in this field for a long time, it was worse than even I thought in terms of the threats to free speech overall. And that was depressing. The one chapter that we left being kind of like, okay, there's still some hope there, was we have a chapter on comedy. And even though some of the comedy stories are horrifying, people having to sign contracts saying they won't offend anybody in England, for example. And of course, the situation for free speech in England is worse even than it is in the United States now. But there were some positive signs coming out of comedy that they weren't going to put up with us. So I have a lot more hope for comedy. And if we're going to get out of this thing, it's going to be the comedians leading the way.
Yeah. Before we wrap things up, your book ends on a more pragmatic note, some potentially positive outcomes, some suggestions along the way. Someone listening to the show right now, we often feel helpless in this arena. We're just watching things happen. Your sense of depression, I don't have it as strongly as you, but I feel it too. There are times I wake up in the middle of the night, I can't go back to sleep because I think about this. But what can people do right now, or even in the coming weeks, to help this matter, to support free speech? I mean, is there something practical they can do, or even start the process of at this point?
Well, most simply, to support FIRE. Sign up for, and I don't necessarily mean money. Of course, we need that as well. But spread the word. Share stories. By us. Share examples. Show the fact that that there are still principled defenders out there who really do defend free speech all across the board. Join our free speech army, as you might want to call it. We had a goal of getting 1 million people to join it in 3 years, by 2025. We already have 950,000. The movement is strong for free speech. And by the way, that is we're pretty close to an equal number of people who think of themselves on the left as on the right. Now, that may sound surprising to some of your listeners, but keep in mind that when you look at the polling, I'm Gen X. People on the left, 45 and up, are still good on free speech. It's everybody below that. That's what you got to worry about. We've got some work to do there. But well, Greg, thank you so much for joining. Join the movement. Yeah, absolutely. And the one way you can do that is by reading The Canceling of the American Mind. It's engrossing. It's frightening at times, but it is a must read. It is so well researched and so provocative and yet hopeful at the same time. And again,
It's in bookstores right now. Just check it out, The Canceling of the American Mind. And if you want to do more, go to thefire.org, sign up like Greg said, or just hit that donate button. That helps too. Your team is fighting the good fight, literally. Your work matters, and this is such an important issue. And God help us all in 2024, because I think it's going to get even more incendiary, and we need more freedom fighters
sure
than
will.
ever. But Greg, thank you for doing this work. Thanks for being on the show, and keep up the good fight.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, before we wrap up, I want to answer that trivia question. Marty McFly's Calvin Klein undies caused a stir, especially since his future mom found them first in the movie Back to the Future. Could that be the best product placement ever? You know, I thought about maybe E.T. and the Reese's Pieces. That's good, but Calvin Klein underwear in Back to the Future? Just perfection. Can't imagine who set that in motion, and I imagine that the folks at the corporate Calvin Klein company were very happy in 1985. Well, that's it for the show this week. Thanks to Radio America for having me as part of their great podcast lineup. And of course, please drop by HollywoodInToto.com. Updated 7 days a week. You've got news and reviews and commentary and everything going on in Hollywood. It is the right take on entertainment. And this year is its 10th anniversary. No cards. Just check it out. And if you like a story, share it with a friend. See you next time.